This interview contains discussion of real-life experiences. To protect the privacy of those involved, all names, workplaces, and identifying details have been changed or removed. Some parts of the conversation have also been edited or omitted due to their graphic nature, in order to avoid causing distress.
In this powerful and honest interview, I sit down with Blondie to discuss her journey through the police force, from her early days at the academy to the challenges she faced as a woman in law enforcement. We talk about the realities of police culture, the impact of sexism and workplace trauma, and the personal toll it can take on your mental health and family life. Blondie shares candid stories about her experiences, the importance of resilience and the process of healing after the job. Whether you're interested in law enforcement, workplace culture, or stories of personal growth, this conversation offers valuable insights and inspiration.
I am here today for my first interview, and I'd just like to say a big thank you to Blondie here, who has decided to come on. And I'm honoured because we actually went through the academy together. So we've known each other for a long time, and we've been through this process together, and we both left at the same time. So I'm super excited to have you here today to get your story. So I just want to have a little bit of background, if we could, on where you grew up and how you joined the police force.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we do have a long history together. 2007. Wow. Babies. Okay, so I grew up in the UK, moved to Australia in 2000, and initially began working in the wedding photography industry. That wasn't very lucrative in terms of making a living because I was just a freelance. So I then got into hospitality. I started working at Crown Casino. And funnily enough, Crown Casino is what led me to join police because one of my friends who I worked with there had applied, and they were restructuring the Crown and changing our roles, and none of us were really pleased about that. And she said to me, "Hey, why don't you apply for police? Well, you never know, you might get in." So it wasn't like this, "Oh, I want to change lives" or anything like that. It was literally just a whim where I went, "Okay, yeah, I'll do it." And then the process happened so quickly. It was, I think, from go to woe, it was probably 6 months, and I got a place at the academy and started in January of 2007 with your good self.
Lovely. Yes, a lifetime ago. So your first experiences of culture within the police force?
I would say walking straight into the academy was the very first time. And prior to that, I think I'd seen, like everybody else, those recruitment ads they run on TV and gone, "Oh yeah, that looks awesome. Like it's real family friendly, very open-minded culture." That was broken the minute I walked into the academy with my bags. So day one, which was a Sunday for me, and I think for many other people, we arrived on the Sunday. And obviously when you go into the academy, there's a lot of squads already there and a lot of sworn members who've worked there for many, many years. But I would say how I would describe it walking in, it was kind of like walking into a meat market. There were just wolf whistles, blokes checking you out. And these are guys in full uniform at all ranks. Some were recruits and some were kind of, I guess, staff there. I think the front desk was probably the first time I sort of experienced it. So yeah, probably the first 20 minutes of walking into the police academy, it was like, oh, okay, I'm getting checked out. And I've just stepped in here and I'm not even in uniform yet. And I'm, dropping my bags off. So that was kind of my very first experience. And that was something that I think not initially, but as a group of friends in the academy, I remember reflecting on this towards the end that, "Oh, do you remember when we first walked in and this is how it was?" So yeah.
Yeah. Funny you mentioned the front desk. It's not until you start talking to them or later on that you actually learn that they're people that have done something wrong in the police force and they've been banished there. So they're there for a reason, and it just flows through into what you received when you first walked in. So let's fast forward to out of the academy into your first police station, which we won't name, but...
No. Okay, so leaving the academy, the first station that I went to, I developed a thick skin very, very quickly. I had to, and I recognized that sort of going through the academy, I kind of clocked on that as a woman in that era, which really was not that long ago. You had to develop a pretty thick skin and kind of let things just roll off, because if you didn't, you were going to be labeled a certain way. So my first station was very mixed bag in terms of rank, personality, experience. So there was a lot of new recruits, but there was also a lot of very, very senior members. The station that I went to also had that kind of stigma that as a senior member, you were there because you were probably not that great at, I have to say, general duties, even though it kind of was general duties. It was sort of more of a specialized department, or you were there because you did something wrong. That was probably where I saw the most sexism, misogyny, just general really bad behavior from males. It was very much open slather in terms of commenting on what you look like, what your personal life was like, what your sexual orientation was, all of that kind of thing. I experienced all of that while I was there, and that was in the first 12 months. So that was probably my grounding to police. And as a very brand new recruit, as you would know, you did not ruffle feathers. You just went with the flow. If you went to a senior member or a supervisor and complained about any of that, you were pretty much told, hey, you joined, you knew what it's going to be like. Suck it up. This is how it is, mate, you know? So that was my
Yeah.
first experience.
Yeah, I remember in the first few weeks being out in the van with somebody and getting asked if I wore G-strings.
I remember comments like that. Probably a lot worse than that. I can tell you, I'll give you one anecdote that sticks in my mind. Was working in a van with somebody, a male senior member, and we got to a job, and I went to get out of the car and he'd locked the door. So every time I kind of went to go the door handle, he'd lock it. And it was funny for the first 2 seconds. And then I kind of looked at him and said, are we getting out or not? And he said to me, I'll let you get out if you give me a blowjob. And I just sat there and went, I think we should just go to the job. But that not knowing how to react. And at that point, when you're very, very junior, I'm at the time, I probably would have been ashamed to admit this, but now looking back, I was probably a little bit scared. I was kind of like, oh, I've never been in this position before with a police officer, no less. It was a very strange experience for me, and it took a lot to process afterwards. And I did at the time, I kind of told a few people about it that was sort of my rank, and we kind of almost laughed it off, but it was like that nervous laughter of, oh, I'm glad it didn't happen to me, glad it happened to you kind of thing. And that member that I've just referred to, he was notorious for that kind of thing, notorious. And everybody knew, the senior sergeants knew, the inspectors knew. That's why he was at that station, because he couldn't be trusted anywhere else, basically. And that was common knowledge.
So he wasn't joking and he was serious.
Dead serious. He was dead serious about it. And I just looked at him and said, oh, no, I think we should just go to the job. He just laughed it off. He just thought it was funny. And that wasn't the first time that kind of thing happened with him. There was another incident where we were in a lift. There was myself and another girl, and he was in the lift as well. And we were going up a few floors, so it was obviously taking a couple of seconds. And as the lift doors closed and the lift started to go up, he grabbed both of our heads, pushed them together and said, give me a snog, you two. And we just jumped back in horror. And that other member that I'm referring to, the other female, she was junior. She was probably about a squad behind me. And she remembers it to this day. And we've spoken about it since. And she said to me, can you believe that happened? And we just let it go. And I said, no, I actually can't believe. And it was quite forceful. It wasn't like a quick sort of, jokey thing. He actually grabbed us by the necks. He was sort of standing in between us, and he stepped back, grabbed our necks, put us together and said, give me a snog, both of you. And we just went, wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah. And that's just one, short little experience throughout your whole career.
One member of many, many male members that have crossed that line. So back in 2008, when I
and I got stationed at. My first shift was actually it was a night shift, and on that crew I was the only female, but the most junior member. And then it was two senior connies and an LSC and a first connie. Well, it would have been a first connie, but that rank wasn't. I don't believe that rank existed then, so it was a connie. But he was probably about 3 years ahead of me. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning and it was a Saturday night, and it was like, hey, let's get pizzas. That's what we do. There's a 24-hour pizza joint around the corner. That was a tradition. So they went out, the van went out, got the pizzas, brought them back, and we're all sitting there. I'm the watch housekeeper sitting at my desk. The guys give me my pizza and I'm just about to open it. And the LSC, who I've been getting creepy vibes from all week, reached up above my head and pulled a plastic bag down from a shelf above me. So not improperty or anything like that, just a bag of stuff. I thought nothing of it. And then over my shoulder, he empties this bag onto my pizza box, which I hadn't opened yet, thank God. And it was a bag of basically dirty, used, disgusting, filthy sex toys, dildos, fluffy handcuffs, just crap like that. And I've just sat back in complete shock and looked at the other boys. The more senior ones thought it was hilarious, but the the most junior one, who was a connie, he just looked at me wide-eyed and he said, what is all that? And McSleazy, senior connie McSleazy, turns around and says, oh yeah, so like when we do a warrant, sometimes we keep a little memento. And so junior member goes, well, how can you do that if it's a warrant? You can't just be taking stuff. And he goes, well, do you reckon they're going to ask for it back? No. So we just keep them here for shits and giggles. In the meantime, they're all just sitting on my pizza box still. And I'm going, well, I'm not touching them. And he's like, can you touch them with your mouth? And I just gave him this look of, don't be ridiculous. Again, the other two members giggled. Young Connie just looked at me, rolled his eyes, and was like, oh, mate, like that sort of look of what a dick. I don't remember how they got cleared away, but I know that I didn't touch them. Around about half an hour later, there was another crew that were coming in. So they were a 7 p.m. crew knocking off at 3 a.m. And it was this very, very senior girl and another, I think an LSC, I can't remember the other person, but I remember her because she came in, and as she was dropping off her gear, she said to me, I heard about what happened earlier. And I said, oh, what do you mean? She said, with the bag of dildos and shit. And I said, oh, yeah. And she goes to me, listen, we've all had that happen, like the girls at least. And she goes, don't make fun of it, don't make light of it, and don't laugh it off, because the more you do, the more stuff like that's going to happen. And I kind of just looked at her and said, oh, I didn't think it was funny. And she said, no, you've got to learn to have a thicker skin, because that kind of thing is rife in this job. Unfortunately, I've been in the job for 21 years and I've seen it all. And it starts like that. And I just went, oh, okay. I actually almost felt a bit like she was sort of telling me off, because I wouldn't say that I laughed when it happened, but I definitely wasn't assertive and I definitely didn't stand my ground. I wasn't projecting what I felt outside, which was absolute humiliation and anger and fury at him. I kind of just sat back and went, oh, I don't know what to do. And I think it was that she was pointing out to me, that you have got to build a thick skin, because if you don't, you're going to get walked all over. Here's another twist to that. So that McSleazy senior Connie that did that, while we were in the application phase of the recruitment phase, you had to go and have an interview with a senior sergeant at a local station. So I booked an appointment with the senior sergeant. That sleazy McConnie was the very first person that I ever set eyes on in the recruitment process. And he said to me, oh, what I'll do is I'll put you in our witness room and I'll go and get the senior sergeant and then let you know, when he's ready, and he'll do the interview wherever he wants to do it. No worries. So I go in. We go in this little witness room off this sort of to the side of the watch house, and he comes in with me and he shuts the door and he says, strip. And I went, sorry? And he goes, strip. And I just looked at him in shock, and he goes, no, I'm just kidding. He goes, but I might ask you that again one day, so be prepared. And walked out. And I just sat down and went, what the fuck was that? It was so bizarre. Like, it was such a weird thing to say to someone that you've just met. You don't know me from a bar of soap. You don't know who I am. I might not be who I say I am. So I just sat there and went, what the fuck? That should have been the very first red flag that I had. But what do? You want the job, you just accept what you come across. I think they've always in some way had a really big impact on me. I think because I was, up until that point, I'd never really experienced anything like that in the workplace. And bearing in mind, that incident with the witness room, I wasn't even in the job yet, which is ironic.
Wow. I want to say I'm shocked, but I'm actually not. I am not shocked at all. And that senior member saying that you had to develop a thick skin, it's crazy, but you do.
I will say, as I got more senior, I think I did develop that very thick skin where it almost got to the point where I don't think anybody would have dared to say something like that to me in the end, not intentionally or sort of treat me that way. But I think the point of it is that it should never happen in the first place. I shouldn't have to develop a thick skin to protect myself from that. It just shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Definitely not. Let's fast forward to some other places you've worked at and give me some more stories like that. Because I also want to get to, because you're obviously no longer in the police force. So we want to talk about your reason and causes for leaving as well. Because it's never just one thing.
No, it's accumulation. And I think it doesn't even have to be things that happen in close succession. It can be things that happen over time. As you know, PTSD is very complex and it's different for everybody. And what leads you to the end point is a very different journey for everybody.
Yeah. So can you take me through some of the processes that you went through, like some of the stories that you've got, just ones that you remember that are the ones that really stick with you?
Yeah, so I was stationed at the station I was just talking about for about a year, and then I transferred out to a regional area. And I will say that being in a regional area back then, I feel like the culture was even more backwards than city culture. So I went to sort of quite a large rural station. To be honest, the first probably year I was there, it was like the Wild West. The way it was run as a station really didn't protect new recruits coming through or PSETs coming through. It was very much a case of, well, you're basically in Tombstone now. You've got to fit in with us, and this is how we are. This is our culture, and this is the way we do it. And it was things like sexualized comments. There was one sergeant in particular who was notorious. He was very difficult to be around because almost everything that you would say, he would turn into some kind of sexual innuendo. And he was indiscriminate about it. It didn't matter whether you were with a crook or a witness or a victim or another colleague. He just couldn't stop his mouth from running off. And it was things like lots of small comments. For example, I remember once speaking to a witness at a job, and he was the 251, so the supervising sergeant, and he's come up to me and he said, "Can you get a statement from her over there and her over there?" And I said, "Oh, well, I've already started talking to this witness." And he said to me, "Well, she's got big tits like you, so you two match." And the person that I was speaking to was standing right next to me, and she just sort of looked at me and looked at him. And I just felt embarrassed to be in that uniform at that point. I ignored it and I walked off. And then within the same sort of small incident, I was taking my statement and a lady handed me her phone to look at a photo. So I had my notepad in one hand and her phone in the other. And he's wandered over, looked over my shoulder and said, "Just balance it on your tits. You've got a great shelf there." And again, in front of this person that I was taking a statement from. So then you've got, not only is that an absolute abhorrent embarrassment of the uniform and the badge, but also it belittles me to this victim or witness that I'm trying to take a statement from. So that her perception of me is not that great after that. In my mind, at least. I'm sure the reality was she probably thought that was as disgusting as I did. Same sergeant,
And there are many. I'm just focusing on this one sergeant at the moment, but I could focus on so many over the years. I was there for 8 years. One day I went to a job and we didn't have a working station camera. So I'd used my mobile phone to take a couple of photos of the damage and brought it back to him to oversee. He said, "Oh, just show me the photos on your phone. Don't worry about printing them out and we'll decide whether they're worth popping in the brief later." So I gave him my phone and it was just photos of, I think, tires that had been slashed. And he starts scrolling and I could see through, by the way he was scrolling, that he was scrolling way too far for the 4 photos that are taken. And I said, "There's only 4 photos there." And he said, "Yeah, but chances are if I keep going through your photos, I'm going to see your tits or your pussy at some point." And I said, "No, you won't see that. You're not going to see that." And just stood there, put my hand out to get my phone back. And he went to do that stupid thing that you do with kids where he hands it to me, I go to grab it, he pulls it back.
Yeah.
I bet he pulls it back. Then he holds it over his head. He says, "I'm going to get your pussy one way or another." And we're in the sergeant's office at this point, which was in that station. It was slightly more isolated than sort of the other common areas. And it was probably the first time in a long time where I actually felt close to tears because it was so humiliating. And, you know, the first thing that goes through your mind is not, this shouldn't be happening. It's, God, I hope there's nothing on my phone I don't want him to see. Not even of that nature, but you've just invading my privacy on so many levels.
Mm.
So that's another story.
Oh gosh, yeah, we've all got those stories, haven't we? But when you actually recount them and you talk about them, it's, yeah, nobody should ever have to live through this. And like, we've all got children now, and I would hate to think if somebody, when they grow up, speaks to them like that, like male or female.
I'd be horrified. I've got a 12-year-old girl, and if someone treated her that way, the fire that would rise from within me, it's just unacceptable. We shouldn't be treated like that in a professional workplace, a police force, no less.
Mm.
So it makes you think. And I found actually, as I became more senior, and I don't know whether this happened with you as well, you become very protective towards young female members. And I was definitely that person who would say to them, "That's not right. You don't have to put up with that." I mean, this particular sergeant had been on a rampage for years and years and years, and there was all sorts of rumors about him. And there was one very, very senior member, female member, that said to me, she said, "You know, I've been sexually assaulted by him on night shift." And I reported it. This was back in the early 90s. And she was told, "Why don't you go and get another job if you don't like this job?" So that was sort of how he was protected as well. There was no repercussions for him, no comeback, no nothing. It was just, we needed to adapt our behavior to his quirky behavior, was how it was always sort of passed off. It's like, "Hey, he's just a bit quirky, you know?"
Yeah, a bit quirky. He sexually assaulted another person, and that's only one that we know of.
Only one that we know of. And she wasn't backwards at coming forward. She said, "Yeah, I was 100% sexual assaulted by him. I had to fight him off one night." And I'm going in my head as a very, very junior member, why is he still here? Why is he still in this job? But you knew that was not something that was ever going to be followed up. They were never going to get rid of him. It just wasn't the culture back then.
Mm. That's crazy. It's astounding to think that, and I mean, we have experienced it, they protect those type of people. It's almost like it's too hard to get rid of them. But if you've sexually assaulted somebody, that's just a huge big cross. See you later, buddy. Like, you are fired.
It's okay if you're just a bit quirky. It's okay if you're just a bit quirky. It's part of your personality. It's okay. So we'll just keep trucking along with you and see where you go. Because, quote, "He was an awesome operator." I'll give you a little twist to this story, which you probably find quite horrifying. The department that he ended up in was Socket.
Oh, okay. So can you please explain to our guests what Socket is?
It's a sexual offences and child abuse unit. So I think it's SOCA now. It was Socket at the time. So that person ended up as a sergeant of that unit. Not the area he actually transferred. It wasn't where we were, but the irony of that is, I mean, I don't even know
irony is the right word. It's an injustice, isn't it?
Yeah, so he is investigating sexual offences.
And dealing with vulnerable victims of quite vulnerable ages too. So children right up to, older people. I can't even imagine how he would be performing that role with any kind of integrity whatsoever. I just can't.
Yeah,
And
that's horrible.
he's still in the job. He's still serving that I know of. So
Yeah, that's crazy. That is crazy. So what really brought you undone? What were you feeling at this point in time? Like anxious or fed up? I know you said you had to develop a really thick skin, but it really impacts us in other ways too, especially at home when we go home. Like I know my stress levels and my cortisol levels were through the roof. Like I just could not regulate.
no, I mean, I experienced that. I don't know that I recognized it at the time. I was trying to conceive at that time, and it just was a non-starter for me. And I actually think looking back that it was probably to do with all the stress of being in that environment. It kind of did get better over time, but only because of the way that I conducted myself, not because the behavior or the culture changed. As far as behind closed doors at home, it was a battle. There were definitely days where, you get the roster out for the 2 weeks ahead, and I'd go through that roster. And if I was working with certain male members, I just used to spend that whole time thinking, how am I going to get out of this shift? Should I go sick? If I go sick, are they going to pick on me for that? It's just those little things that come home with you. You can't avoid it. So then that impacts on your family life because you are stressed. You're not enjoying going to work when you should be. In the first few years of being a copper, you should be like on cloud nine. And that's how I expected it to be. But it does impact your home life because you've got this weight on your shoulders all the time thinking of these small incidents that other people don't know about because you're not talking about it with anybody. I mean, my partner at the time was also in the job, and he was of that era where that kind of thing, I mean, he would have thought that was funny, which is why we're not together anymore, obviously. But he would have just found that hilarious. He wouldn't have found that something that would be a serious incident. He'd just go, oh, the boys kind of thing. So yeah, it definitely affected me at home and friendships too, because in a regional area, you do all socialize together. I don't want to have a drink with some guy that's, going through my phone and treating me like that. I don't want to have a drink with him and his family and look at his wife in the eye and know that she doesn't know a thing about what he's like at work. So personal life, social life, it affects everything. It's like a little cancer that creeps in to every facet of your life, and you don't realize it until you're away from it.
So when did you realize?
I realized very early on. So probably within the first 4 years, I think was when my illusion was completely broken by then. And I think there was a period of time there, particularly when I was quite junior, where it was probably, I would say now, looking back, I was in survival mode. We all had that, I think it was like an analogy given to us where you're a duck on a pond and on the top, you're kind of floating along looking real cool, but your little legs underneath are just fighting to keep up. And that's how I felt. And that was probably about 4 years in, I started to go, this is not what I thought it was going to be. But by then, you're kind of entrenched in it. You need the job. You need the security. You don't want to leave because it is a good job in terms of providing, financial security. So I just kept going, I guess.
Right. So this is 4 years in and you were in for 16?
Yeah, I was just touching 16 when I got out, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's crazy. So those years following on, the amount of damage it would have done to your body, like your mental health, your spiritual health.
Yeah. So I did develop a lot of health issues. Like headaches were a big thing for me. And it's funny because I didn't make the connection, but when I would go on leave, I had no headaches. It was perfectly fine. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that headaches are stress. So these debilitating headaches that I used to get, and it would affect my vision and everything. And then almost the day that I went on leave, it was like they vanished. And I think, oh, I wouldn't even remember them. I think, oh, it's great. I feel good. I just needed to get more sleep. That was my thing. I would always put everything down to, I probably just need to get more sleep. But I knew, that it wasn't just that. And I did start seeing a psychologist at one stage there very early on, probably about the 5th year. And she specialized in emergency services, counseling specifically. And she did say to me, stress, headaches, work, it's all connected. And it will always be connected until you find a way to cope through it. Other than, because at that point I was, I'm not leaving the job. I need to stay in the job. She was quite it was an eye-opening seeing her, because she counseled many, many emergency services workers before. And she said, it's all connected. This is a very high stress job. And I'm not just talking about the jobs you go to, it's the environment that you're in. So I had a fair inkling of police and the culture.
And that's it. Like, we're just focusing today largely on your culture and experiences. But like she's touched on, the jobs the emergency services people go to, they stay with you forever. Yeah.
They do. Yeah. Well, the last 2 jobs that I attended before I left the job were essentially the straw that broke the camel's back. So I can talk about them if you want me to.
Yeah.
So and they were within weeks of each other. So leading up to them, I'd been upgraded. So put into a position that was higher than the one that I was gazetted to. So you basically given an acting supervisor job.
Yep.
And I was for I think about 18 months. That in and of itself is a very stressful period of any member's life, because being upgraded is a very much a time where you cannot put a foot or a pen or a type or a type a single stroke wrong in a report, because the minute you do that, everybody's on you. It doesn't matter if you're a sworn sergeant and you make mistakes, but if you're upgraded and you're on that pathway to get there, you're under a microscope, you're under micro supervision. Every single decision that you make is heavily criticized, but never praised. So it's only, and this is not just my sort of perception, this is quite a common perception of members that are upgraded. I was in that role, I was upgraded, and just not feeling any support. You would think that some of your friends who are substantive sergeants would support you, but they kind of almost put you through the ringer more than anybody else, because there's kind of like, well, I got here, you've got to get here the hard way too. It's not the yellow brick road, you've got to work your way. You've got to build that yellow brick road, basically. So I was getting very little support. I was managing probably the most difficult members in the station that they thought would be a good walk-up start for me. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before.
Yep.
And one of the main things I noticed that whenever I was 251, so a roving supervisor, I very rarely had another member with me. It was very much a case of, oh, we don't have anyone for you today. You one up. You're just going to have to deal with that. No worries at all. I'm happy to work one up. It's probably almost easier for me in some respects, given who that they would assign to me.
Sorry for the interruption, but after careful consideration, I have decided to edit out this section. Blondie talks about 2 jobs she attended close together that both involved the accidental deaths of 2 children. It had me in tears. So with respect to the families and people involved and not wanting to add any further trauma, I have removed it. The interview will continue from the end of that job. Thanks for listening.
It was about as chaotic as you can possibly imagine. And my phone, both my personal phone and the work phone, I think to this day, I hear an Apple ringtone and I get that feeling of, that dread in my soul when I hear that Apple ringtone, because it always takes me back to that job where the amount of phone calls I was getting, it was probably one of the most heightened jobs I've ever been to. I did 7 hours overtime that night. I walked into the station after the job, handed over my scene to somebody else coming in to take over from me, walked into the station, took my belt off, put it on the table. The senior sergeant walked in and said, "Did you organise any OT?" And I said, "I'm sorry." And he said, "Did you organise your overtime before you took it?" And I said, do you know what? I actually don't know, because I was so busy doing 10 to 15 different things in that job. I'm not sure that I covered that. And he said, don't do that again. Next time, ring up and ask for OT. And as he walked out, something in me just snapped. And I said, yeah, no worries, I'm fine. And he turned around and said, what was that? And I said, no worries, I'm fine. And he just looked at me and said, mate, this is a job, and walked off. And it was at that point that I went, I think I'm done. I'm not sure what I'm done with, but I think I'm done. I handed my whole belt to a watch housekeeper and said, can you de-keep that for me? I'm going home. And she said, oh, what do you want me to do with your stuff or with your belt? I said, chuck it in the bin. I'm not going to need it anymore. But she remembers that so clearly. I've seen her out and about because we sort of live close by. And she said, I'll never forget your face when you came in and gave me that belt. And she said, I knew you were meant to be de-kitting your own stuff, but I just did it for you and never said anything. She said, I even signed for you, because she said, I could see that something in you was broken that night. And I said, and it was never the same afterwards. Never the same. I don't think I ever enjoyed going to work after that. And it almost wasn't the job itself, although that was tragic and it does still play on my mind. It was how I was treated afterwards coming in. It should have been, hey, mate, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Like, that was an awful job. How's your offsider? He's really junior. And I spoke to that junior offsider a few days later, and he just said, I've never been to anything like that. I don't even know what to think about it. And so he and I sort of chatted about it, but no welfare, no nothing, just you're on the van the next day, pull your big girl pants on and get on with it.
That's heartbreaking. Like, not only the story, the parents, the coming back into the station and, yeah, having no support. It's just all about your overtime. How dare you finish that crime scene and be there for people of the public? Not even a good job, you must have been tough. Hey, don't do that again because you haven't had your overtime authorized. And that, watch housekeeper that you handed your belt to, like, good on her for covering for you. Like, she could obviously see that you weren't okay. She obviously knew the job you'd been at too, and it's like, yeah, I'll do that for you. Yeah. But so when you say you were done, you still went back to work?
Yeah, I still went back to work. I went back to work for actually the next day, or it was a couple of days afterwards, I went into my own station because I was actually at another station. I was performing those duties at a different station. So I went into my station and I went and saw my senior sergeant and said, don't want to do the upgrade anymore, had enough of it. And she was really surprised. She said, well, you're doing really well. Like, I don't know, why would you not want to keep doing it? And I said, oh, it's not for me. And I wouldn't sort of go into it with her at that point. And I would say I noticed my personality changing. So within a station, and I don't mean to put tickets on myself by any means, because I'm definitely not that type of person, but I was the person that, and this was said to me by many, many people, that, I'd see on the roster that you and I were working together, Blondie, and I'd be like, Rika, we're going to have an awesome shift. She's so funny. She'll make it fun, but she's switched on when she needs to be. And that feedback, I got that a lot. But then and it was always the one, let's have a laugh. Let's have a bit of a laugh. Not at anyone's expense, because you don't need to do that. We're not at primary school, but we'd make work fun, where we could. But after that, I even noticed I found it really hard, and it sounds really sad, but I found it really hard to smile, even at the little things. Everything just got so heavy. Everything just took on this sinister kind of, sinister meaning. It just wasn't fun anymore. It was like the spark had gone for me. And I thought, if I keep going, how far is this going to go? What am I going to turn into? I'm not the person that I used to be anymore. It's just my personality was almost getting dumbed down because I was just creating this wall around myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So you realized where you were at, and that's when you left.
Yeah, very unsupportive culture. My path was a common one. I went off on sick leave and then sort of took a couple of weeks to try and figure out what I was going to do, where I was going to go from there. But I knew the minute I took that sick leave, I think I knew deep down I was done. Initially, I was just going to resign, and then advice from another member said to me, that's what work cover's there for. That's why it's there. That you are injured as a result of things that have happened at work to you. So why would you just resign and not give yourself that time frame to just kind of sit back a bit and try and figure out where you're going to go from here? Because the thing is about work cover, going on to work cover, is your head needs to be in the right place to go through that process, first of all. And of course it's not. That's why you're going on work cover. So you need that time to kind of get your head straight and make decisions while you're not in the emotional part of, what you're going through.
Mm. Yeah, very much so, because it is a big step. Like there is a lot of poo-pooing, I guess is the only word I can think of, for people that go on work cover.
It's not an easy process to go through it all. For someone in that frame of mind, because whether it's a physical, a mental, emotional injury, whatever it is, you need to be in top form mentally just to go through that process, because it is not an easy process. It's actually very intricate and very hard to go through.
Yeah. So you went off on work cover, and how long did you spend on work cover? Like how did that process work out for you? Was it time for you to breathe?
Yes. It was actually the perfect thing to do in the end, because it gave me that space. Had I just taken sick leave and just sort of stepped away or resigned. And the other thing too was the closure. I needed that closure. I needed to know that it was never the way that I wanted to leave the job, because I thought when I joined that I was going to be in the job till I was in my 60s, like most of us probably did. So it was never, I've always felt sort of as though I hadn't had the opportunity to leave on my own terms, but taking that time off on work cover gave me time to come to terms with that and seek the resources I needed to help myself heal. I wouldn't have been able to do that. Had I just resigned, I think it would have just been probably digging myself into a further hole.
Yeah, because I think if you resign, it's like then you're straight back into another workplace or doing something else, and you don't get that downtime to heal. So when we talk about taking time to get better and heal, what did you do for yourself? Like what did you find worked for you?
The number one thing that worked for me, and it was a bit of a journey getting to it, but was to find a psychologist that A, I can open up to, B, she is receptive to all of the issues that I'm having that are related to emergency services. So she was emergency services trauma accredited. So that was specifically her speciality, that she worked with emergency services personnel. So I went through a couple of psychologists until I found her, and she was probably the turning point for me, because she finally understood a lot of I think I went through 6 before I got to her. They just didn't understand the complexities of working in this type of role. They just didn't understand. To a point they did. They understood trauma to a point, but she was more specific in this type of trauma, which is more common because of what we deal with. Notwithstanding the culture that we're in, she also had a really good understanding of that too. So that was probably the number one thing that I did. And then she implemented a few things that I worked on as well, just within myself. We did EMDR therapy as well, which I've just probably stopped doing that after 2 years. That was a bit hit and miss at the start, but I think that it did eventually help.
Can you explain EMDR for me?
I'll try as best I can. So it is trauma-based therapy, but it's basically they use rapid eye movements to reignite incidents that you've been either in or witnessed, and then you reframe. So they teach you to reframe how your body reacts to those incidents. I'm not sure if I've explained that perfectly, but it's the crux of it is that you're revisiting and you're retraining your body to process those memories in a different way. It's quite brutal at first when you first start doing it, because if you're a bit of an avoidant like I am, it can be it's almost reigniting the trauma, but that's the whole point of it, so that you can reframe it in your mind.
Yeah, yeah. Do some healing around that space.
To do with eye movements, which is a subconscious processing of a scene in your mind, basically. I'm sure somebody else could explain it a lot better than that, but that's kind of my dumbed down version.
Yep. Yeah. So what else have you done to heal? And how many years has this taken you to get to this point where you're at now?
I left in 2021. So yeah, 4 years. Wow, that's gone quickly. Well, to be honest, time away, just being away from the job, you I don't know whether it's true for everyone, but you do go through quite a lot of stages with leaving. You go through, so initially when I left, there was this rage that just ate me alive. I would see another police member and I'd be so angry. Why are they okay? Why are they still in the job? How come they didn't, blah, blah, blah. So you go through a lot of that. Then you go through a denial process and then you go through a grieving process. But then finally you pop out the other side and you realize that the ex-members years and years ago said to you, hey, there is life after Vic, they're actually right. And it was just about reconnecting with me as a person, not a police member, just kind of finding myself again. As cheesy and corny as that sounds, you do kind of become something else when you're a police member. You kind of, your personality almost molds and shifts into that. And then even when you're on leave and you're not at work, you still kind of are that police member. So when that's all taken away from you, you almost have to recalibrate who you are. And so I've spent a lot of time doing that. I no longer feel the need to tell everyone that I meet, oh, I used to be a police member, when they say, oh, what do you do for work? Well, I used to be, and now I just say, oh, I don't work at the moment. And most people don't really sort of ask about it anymore, because that was also a big thing, was the shame of, I'd be thinking, well, what are they going to think about me leaving such an, great career? So yeah, a lot of it for the last 4 years has been me just recalibrating my mind, my body, my emotional, my spiritual self to who I am now, because I'm not the same person that I was before. You don't go through all that and then come out the other side and you're exactly the same person that you were in 2007. Having seen all that. And so it's kind of about just slowing things down for me, learning to process emotions and learning how my reactions affect other people. Because as I said, like, there are some things in my personality now that I'm not a fan of that have come about as a result of what I've been through. But it's a constant working on myself. That's the only way I can put it, is it never ends. I just have to keep going, keep working, keep processing things. It's the only way to be.
Yeah, I know it is. And I think especially when you have a fair bit of downtime and you get time to breathe, a lot more stuff pops up that you've kind of pushed to the back and, put a few more layers over it as if it never happened. And then it pops up and you're like, oh, okay, all right, now I have to work through that one. Whatever this is, wherever it's popped up, now I have to work through it. So what do you do now to bring joy to your life? Like, what are little things throughout the day that just make you feel happy?
The mundane things. It is the most mundane thing. So as you know, I'm a massive animal lover. So you bring an animal to my house, it's going to get taken care of. I think I have part of my personality, I'm very nurturing. So I like to take care of things. I like to take care of people. I like to provide, a nice home. It's so funny because it's just the mundane things that probably once in my life I would have found a chore, but now it's the everyday things that I do, like going for a walk every day. I've started strength training again. I couldn't dream of stepping into a gym, but my partner is an ex-personal trainer and she said, you don't need to go to a gym. There's stuff around the house you can use to do strength training. And so I've been doing a little bit of that as well. Yeah, it's just finding joy in the simple things again, not having that cynical worldview anymore. Just going, yeah, things aren't great, and I'm not talking about, the world, but just in my world. Sometimes there are days when I feel like crap and I don't want to get out of bed and I just think, how am I going to get through this day? But it's just the little things that I stop and take a moment for, like having a sick animal that I've nurtured back to health and seeing that animal just thriving. It's like, yeah, I've done that. I did that. That animal would have died were it not for me. My stepdaughter the other day, she wanted a costume for Halloween. And 3 years ago, I would have gone, not a chance, not doing that. We did it together. It was something I never would have done with her 3 years ago because I would have been too busy to this, to that, to, oh, I can't be bothered. But we just took that time and we did it, and just slowing things down a bit. I know it sounds crazy because it's such a small thing, but it's just slowing things down and taking those little wins as well. Instead of focusing on things that are not positive, I try and focus on the things that are, the little wins. Sometimes it can be really hard, but even if it's just one thing in the day, I'll go, yeah, I'm really glad that happened. That was cool that I did that, or saw that, or was there, or met this person, or spoke to, just the little things.
Yeah. Gratitude, right? Gratitude for the little things. So I think that would be your silver lining. Is that's what you've gotten out of this process.
I've always been a glass half empty person, but I've worked so hard to turn that around because it's not conducive to any form of self-growth at all, being a glass. And sometimes you can't help being that type of person, but I was very much a glass half empty. And I've noticed, and other people have noticed too, that I'm more positive about things. That's been a very long process though. It did not happen overnight.
But you're still working on it, which is great. Yeah. And I think in moments like these, especially going through what you've been through, it's a blessing that you have family that supports you and those little joys and love that you can take every day.
Correct. That is absolutely key, because I do know people who've been through this process and they're just by themselves. And it's, touching on that with family. My family are really great. They understand. But something that I did notice that was very, very difficult to process was I thought that I had friends in the job that were, I would have done anything for. I had their back. I'm not the only person that's noticed this, but when you go on work cover, you're forgotten. No one reaches out to you. The people that you counted on in the job and considered friends and had them in your phone and answered their messages at 3:00 in the morning because they were at a job and something had happened, they wanted to share it with you, and you were like, oh yeah, we're good mates, but that's what we do. They're gone, and I tried so hard to maintain those friendships, but that rift between us just grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And I remember having quite a deep session with my psych about that. And she said that in her experience, she'd found that to be the norm rather than, an exception with me. She said, no, that's very much what happens. It's almost like people have this fear of anything to do with mental health has a stigma. I think people have this fear that, do they think it's going to rub off on them? I don't know. I really don't. But that was something I struggled with a lot. Was I definitely felt very, very grateful that I had my family, because my friends dropped me like a hot potato, as in friends in the job. Friends out of the job, much easier to talk to about it. They were probably more understanding, but you'd think that the people you're going through this with would be supportive, and they're not. And it sounds harsh, but when I see on, Facebook, something happens with a police member and there's all this talk about the blue family and the brotherhood of the brothers and sisters in blue and the thin blue line. And I think, yeah, that's all well and good when there's a tragedy and we have a funeral and closure to go to. But when you're sort of forgotten, you're on work cover and you really need that support, you're not a part of the blue family. You're not a blue brother or sister. You just don't exist. I know that sounds very bitter, but that for me, for my experience and for people that I've spoken to about it, they feel the same.
Yeah, I totally agree. I am with you 100% on that. So just before we finish this up, in a few words, could you sum up who are you now?
Oh, that is a really hard question. The first thing I will say is not the person I was before. That person's gone, but that's not a bad thing. I think I have grown as a person. There are certain parts of my personality that have bloomed and some that have been dampened down, and I'm okay with that. I'm very much more zenful person now than I ever was. I have a much more open mind, particularly around mental health. I probably was less sympathetic than I should have been about that. And unfortunately, it takes me putting the boots on and wading through that to realize that there needs to be more work done there. And so I'm very, very much more open-minded and sympathetic about that. And I think I'm just a calmer person. My stepdaughter comes to me all the time for advice, and she says, "Oh, whenever I come to you, you've always got some weird little story for me, but I love it." So I guess I've become a bit of a counselor as well. She's like, "I love your weird little stories that you tell me to explain something." So yeah, I
That's
don't know
good.
what that makes me, but that's who in a nutshell, that's basically who I am. Not the person I was before, but not necessarily worse off for it.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Well, I love that we got to have this little chat today. Thank you so much for coming on here and going on this journey with me. I'll be eternally grateful.
I'll be on the journey with you the whole way.
If you found this video helpful or moving, please like, share, and subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section and stay tuned for more real conversations that will be coming very soon.